Okay, this morning we're starting out in Acts 22, and kind of to catch us up where we left off last week. Brother Paul, he was bound and determined to go to Jerusalem, and of course when he got there, he went in and met the James and all the leadership there. And then they got to talking to him about how what so much was against him, and they had 4 men that took a vow, and it told Paul that he needed to go and purify himself and everything, and take the men and and everything, and before he went into the church there, temple, and so when he did, and when he went into the temple, of course here come the Jews that's after him, came from Asia, and started up the people, and they took Paul out, and they locked the doors of the temple, and proceeded to put pain, and it looked like some pain and stuff on him, or like it's beating him or whatever, and caused such a motion that the Roman guards or centurions there went down to see what the problem was and to break it up. And so they decided to take Paul inside the castle there to get him away from him, to see what was going on. So on their way of taking him in, Paul had persuaded the captain there to let him speak to the people. When they got on the steps, kind of in the elevated position, to let him speak to the people. Anyway, that's here in 22. This is where we start at. So as he starts to speak to them, he says, "Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you." And when they had heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silent. And he said, "I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye are all this day." And this word zealous means full of, or enthusiastic. In other words, he too felt as much as they were about God toward him. "And I persecuted this way unto death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women." And Paul wrote in his first letter to Timothy, in chapter 1, verse 13, he told Timothy there, he says, "Who was before a blasphemer," he's talking about himself here, he said, "who was before a blasphemer, a persecutor, and injurious." In other words, he decided, whatever, "but I obtained mercy, because I did it ignorantly in unbelief." Of course, what he was saying, this was before he met Jesus and was saved and filled with the Holy Ghost and received the truth and preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, when the Lord saved Paul, he done a twofold thing, didn't he? He stopped the one that was hurting his people, and he gave him a commission that would rest the rest of his life on preaching him a salvation, a way of salvation. So, and all this time, and the Lord knew that Paul was going to meet opposition everywhere he went. He already knew that. Number 5 says, and also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom I have received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus, to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem, to be punished. And then, of course, in Acts, if we remember back in Acts chapter 1, verse 9, chapter 1 and 2, verse 1 and 2, he says here, it says, and Saul yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. So, just as dedicated as he was in serving the Lord, when he got saved and got his commission from the Lord to go preach the gospel, he was also equally in the job he had before, wasn't he? He was, more or less not determined, but doing it at heart. He wanted to do a good job on what he was doing, and evidently he was doing a little bit more than a good job, because he got the attention of the man on high, the Lord. So, that's the thing today. We need to remember that too, don't we? You start doing a lot of things wrong, or start, doing contrary, and you might get the attention of the Lord real quick, Number 6, and verse 6 says, and if it came to pass that as I made my journey, and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a bright light round about me. And I fell upon the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto him, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. That's the way it is today. If the Lord wants to speak to you, he speaks to you through the Holy Spirit. He can let you know anything he wants you to know at any time. And the person next to you don't hear a thing. But as far as the light, that pure light that shone, that was brighter than the sun, that overcame them, I guess it was hard to miss that, wasn't it? But this here happened once before. If you remember, or study very much, in Daniel chapter 10, verses 6 and 7, says, this is what Daniel saw. He said, his body also was like beryl, and his face was the appearance of lightning, and his eyes were lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet were like color of polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. But I, Daniel, saw the vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So, they didn't hear or see what he saw, right? Other than they knew something bad was going on there, or they thought something bad was going on, and it was just the presence of the Lord coming to talk to Daniel and show him the vision. Something that they wanted Daniel to know. So if the Lord wants you to know something, he could talk to you personally without anybody else knowing at any time. Matter of fact, I've had him talk to me in the middle of the night, wake up, something be a bother me or something, and just all of a sudden just revealed your mind. Then the next morning when you get up, is still with you. You know what the Lord wants you to know. It's like it was, I had made a smart crack to Judy in here one time, and I really didn't mean nothing by it. But the next day, that night, I think the Lord let me know it. The next day, I went to Judy and apologized to her at her house. I apologized. She said, no. I told her, I said, well, the Lord told me that that wasn't the right thing to say, and it wasn't, confession's good for the soul. But when the Lord puts you back on track, don't do it no more. It's time to quit. Next time you may not get off as easy. Yeah, boy. Okay, go back to this. 10 says, and I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, arise, and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. And one, Ananias, a devout man, now that word devout is very religious, showing reverence or earnestly, according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked upon him, and he said, the God of our fathers hath chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see the just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. Think about that. God's decision for him to see. Do you understand what we're saying? God gave the command and Jesus followed through, right? That's what they're saying, that Jesus was the just one and heard his voice. But God gave the commands, what Ananias was telling him. So, even Ananias knew this. So the Lord had to tell Ananias, right? For him to know this. And in Galatians chapter 1, verse 11 and 12, Paul wrote, but I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. So he got his training and his from the Lord. 15, it says, for thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And it came to pass that when I was come again to Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance. And I saw him saying unto me, make haste, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know that I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I was also standing by, and consented unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. So, Luke wrote in chapter 11, starting at verse 45. starting at 45 through 50. Luke wrote, Then answered one of the lawyers and said unto him, Master, thus saying thou reproachest us also? And he said, Woe unto you also, you lawyers, for you laden men with burdens grievous to be borne, and you yourselves touch not the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe unto you, for you build the sepulchre of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. Truly ye bear witness that ye allow the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you built their sepulchres. Therefore also said wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they shall slay and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. So somewhere down the road, all these apostles and preachers and evangelists and all that have been slain while they were preaching, their blood is going to be required by the hand of the men that's done it. So what they're telling us, boys, we're going to be held accountable one way or the other, right? What we're do, if we don't get our sins covered under the blood, then we're going to be held accountable. Of course, these people here, they thought they were doing right, but, they weren't doing right. Because like Jesus told them before, they knew not me, and they knew not the one that sent me. So they say they know God, they're doing God's work, but they didn't know God. Because if they'd known God, they would have known who Jesus was, right? Okay. 21. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. And they gave him audience unto his word, and then lifted up their voice and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. So, they're wanting to condemn Paul, right? They're wanting to kill him. 23 said, And as they cried out, and cast off their clothes, and threw dust into the air. I couldn't find nothing on that, throwing that dust. Does that mean that they disapprove? You know anything about that? Well, the reason I'm asking that, in watching the movies that John Wayne made in Horse Soldiers, as they rode into town, the women went out in the street and was gathering up dust and throwing it in the air. So I was just wondering, that was, they disapproved or they whatever. When that just come to my mind about that. A disapproval or something, I don't know. That was kind of, I couldn't find nothing about that. It's hard to come up with some of this, but I'll ask you, Jimmy, to see if he can research that for us. That's kind of why yeah.
Because they retire their clothes when they get through with something.
Yeah.
Put dust on their head.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But what, just throwing the dust in there? Anybody got anything on that? Knows anything? Huh?
I would say it is an act of disapproval that they're showing themselves.
Yeah.
Tearing their clothes like they're meant to.
Yeah. Okay. I'll ask Jimmy after a while. We can see if I can get him to, if he knows how to find out something about that. Okay, in 24, says the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging. Now that word scourge or scourging said rods were used for beatings, but whips was used for scourging. So he was to be whipped. Ooh. Boy, he'd been whipped, beat, stoned. That he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, and that word thongs means narrow leather strips to be tied up with leather strips, Paul said unto the centurions that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou dost, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was free-born. So Paul said, You ain't giving me nothing. I was born free, right?
Well, he could, back then you could buy your freedom.
Yeah,
So that captain had bought his.
yeah,
Paul was born into it.
yeah. The captain seemed to act like it, he was giving him something, or whatever, but he wasn't giving him. Yeah. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him, or tortured, whatever. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty, wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. And 23 says, And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the chief priest Ananias commanded them that stood by to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. Now I tried to look up that whited wall. That whited wall is like if you whitewash a wall to cover up something, right? So why are you kind of inquiring, well, what are you trying to cover up, huh? Yeah. So, for sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? So it's like he's saying that, hey, you don't know really what you're doing, right? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I''twas not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of the people. But when Paul perceived that the one part of the part were Sadducees, and the others Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. Of course, the Pharisees and them, they believed in that. But yet the Sadducees don't. For the Sadducees says that there is no resurrection, neither angels nor spirit, but the Pharisees confessed both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees heart arose and stove, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Sounded like that was good advice, don't you think? And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among them, and to bring him into the castle. Well, I want to stop right there.